We're going to start working with reading the story Shepherd of Admeuts, which is a bit different from other stories that we have read, because in this story you are responsible for finding and translating all prepositional phrases, as well as knowing where to put the adjectives or understanding which adjectives describe which nouns. In all the previous stories, we've only had to worry about the nouns in the story. But now we are responsible not only for nouns, but prepositional phrases as well as adjectives. Please notice that when you look at the text of the story, there are bold-faced words. The bold-faced words in the story are verbs, and they will still be translated for you on the vocabulary list. Also, please note that there are italicized words in the story, and these words are conjunctions and adverbs. Here we can see several of them. These will be important to understand as we talk about the construction of a Latin sentence and clauses. From this point forward, we're also going to be doing a little more than just reading the story, but we are going to use them as a jumping point for discussion and learning about Roman culture and how it connects to our modern world. You'll find at the beginning of the document, when you open it, a list of things that you need to know in order to work with the story, as well as a list of things that you will be required to do in order to read the story. So for the story Shepherd of Admeuts, the first thing is that you need to know vocabulary for the story, and there is a vocabulary list for you in the file that is in Moodle directly below this little explanation of how to work with the story. You should be familiar with how nouns and adjectives and prepositions work, so we have been working with all of those. I don't think that will be an issue. As well as English sentence structure, it's very important to remember where we place a direct object in a sentence in English, because sometimes you're going to see direct objects in a Latin sentence as the very first word written in the accusative case, and we have to remember that we can't use that in English until after the verb. Be careful also in remembering that the dative case can be translated by using to or for. Sometimes you may see that at the beginning of a sentence and in Latin, and we'll have to place it later in the sentence in English. Finally, you need to understand something about what a clause is, and we're going to explain that in the context of looking at a Latin story in just a few moments. One of the things that you will need to do before translating not just this story, but any piece of reading that you approach with Latin as you are beginning students, and whenever you find yourself reading more complicated Latin and are having difficulty making your way through the sentence, there's a series of steps you can go through to help make the process easier, and it begins by finding prepositional phrases and translating them, and I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Another thing that will help with that is finding clauses, and we are also going to do that. And then, of course, when you are finished with those things, I'd like you to prepare a written translation for the story to hand in to me. I'd like you to answer the checking for understanding questions, which are listed right here. And I would also like you to find the link for the voice thread, which contains essential questions and will serve as our forum for discussion of the essential questions that are attached to this story. The checking for understanding questions are listed right here. There are 19 of them, and each will be worth a point, and they will create a formative assessment grade for you in your grade book. They are also intended to serve as a guide to take you through the translation. So these questions are ordered in the same order of the story, so you should be able to understand that as you read, you are going to be answering these questions, so you can use them to help you figure things out. The essential questions are listed here as well, We will answer these in a VoiceThread discussion, and there is a link in Moodle for that. Be thinking about these essential questions as you read, since we are going to be asking you to answer them within the context of the story, as well as making connections between what we read there and what happens in our modern world. All right, let's take a look at the story. You'll notice that in the header it says that you are to find and put all prepositional phrases in parentheses. The reason that you want to do this first in a Latin sentence is because a prepositional phrase is never going to contain essential information in a sentence, such as a subject, a verb, a direct object, an indirect object, or a predicate noun. So by placing the prepositional phrase in parentheses, you block out things that are not important to the essential meaning of the sentence, and it allows you to focus on the words that remain and clearly look at their endings and the grammar associated with them. Sometimes there's a little bit of a skill in finding a prepositional phrase in a Latin sentence. Obviously, you need to know your Latin prepositions, so if you aren't familiar with what they are or can't remember the list of them, make sure to have that list near you. They are also listed on the vocabulary list given to you. You'll recognize them because you see the preposition followed by plus accusative or plus ablative. I did not put the translations of the prepositions on the vocabulary list because they are something that you need to know. So if you have trouble identifying prepositions in English, you can learn what they are by memorizing the Latin. So obviously what you need to do is scan the sentences and look for prepositions. In these first few sentences, I do not see any prepositions, so therefore there are no prepositional phrases. I see that my first preposition is on this line of the story, and it is the preposition propter. So that's where I'm going to begin my prepositional phrase. The question now is, where does the prepositional phrase end? In English, it's rather easy to determine because we just look for the object of the preposition, and that's really what we're going to do here as well. But which word is the object of the preposition? In Latin, the object of a preposition must be written in either the accusative case or the ablative case. Propter is a preposition that requires the accusative case. So mortem and fili are both following propter. Only one of them ends in the accusative case, that would be mortem. So therefore it is the object of your preposition. You can end the prepositional phrase there. Now you may also see that this noun, which comes after the preposition and is followed by the comma, perhaps you think that it should also go in the prepositional phrase. Many times a prepositional phrase will include a genitive case noun, and in fact filii is in the genitive case. It makes sense that it belongs there, you can automatically place it inside the prepositional phrase. You may not be able to determine that until you read the entire sentence. So for right now, since it's not clear whether filii goes with mortem or filii goes with Apollo, remember that the genitive is either going to work with the noun that comes immediately before it or the noun that comes immediately after it. So if you can't tell, it's okay to leave it out. The comma here does give us a little bit of a clue. It probably makes sense to include it in the prepositional phrase. So I still feel hesitant to do that until I know what's going on in the whole sentence. So I'm just going to leave this here. Now you could answer the question as to whether or not it goes with the prepositional phrase by translating what the prepositional phrase says at this point. Propter means because of or account of, and mortem means death. So together these two words say because of the death. Now right away I want to know whose death, which would allow me to have the genitive noun in the prepositional phrase. So I am going to include it in the prepositional phrase. So now the prepositional phrase says on account of the death of the son. So there we have one of the prepositional phrases. As we continue to move forward, we see that 2 lines away we have another preposition, odd, and you see that we have 2 nouns that follow odd, teram and Jupiter. Only one of them is the object of the preposition. We have to remember that odd takes the accusative case, so teram is the accusative case noun, so that's where we're going to end our prepositional phrase. Jupiter, which is Jupiter in English, is in the nominative form. How do I know that? I know the vocabulary. If you don't know that, you're going to have to look at the vocabulary list and look for the declension of the noun and pay attention to its form. This is the nominative form, so a nominative case noun will never be part of a prepositional phrase, so therefore this is separate, and in fact you've actually found the subject of your sentence. Ad terram means to the land. It's very important to make sure that you also translate the prepositional phrase. Let's look for one more prepositional phrase. I see one on the very next line. It begins with in. I know that in can be followed by the accusative or the ablative case, so I look at the words that come after it. E is an ablative ending, and then I look also at Olympo, which is also an ablative ending, and then I look at the next word, manera, which is in boldface words, so that's a verb, so obviously that's not going to be in the prepositional phrase. I have 2 ablative case nouns. How am I supposed to decide which one is the object of the preposition? Well, you don't have to. They actually are both the object of the preposition. Usually when you have 2 nouns of the same case, one immediately after the other, as we have here, the second noun is telling you something about the first noun. So here, Olympo is giving us a specific name for the monte. Monte means mountain. So this prepositional phrase means on Mount Olympus. On Mount Olympus. I'll notice that in this line of the story there are 2 more prepositional phrases. Per is a preposition that must be followed by the accusative case. Here I have an accusative ending. This is a verb which cannot be in a prepositional phrase, so the prepositional phrase ends at anum. This means per anum. In, again, can be followed by the accusative or the ablative. I only have one word that follows in, so it's in the ablative, and obviously that is the object of the preposition, and this would mean in the land, or you can also say on the land. Let's jump down here and take a look at a prepositional phrase beginning with in also, and this time we notice that it is followed by items in the accusative. Notice how I don't always just look at the first word that comes after it, but I look at multiple words that come after the preposition, because sometimes you might have additional nouns like we did here, and sometimes you can have adjectives. Regiam is in the accusative case. Pulchram also has an accusative ending, and then it's followed by a verb. So 2 items in the accusative case, that's where my prepositional phrase ends. This, of course, is an adjective that is describing regiam. In, when it's followed by the accusative, means into, so this prepositional phrase is translated as into the beautiful palace. So in a nutshell, that's how you work through finding prepositional phrases in Latin sentences. I didn't find quite all of them in these first 3 small paragraphs, so you'll have a little bit of work to do there. It's very important for you to go through and do that first so that you have an idea of where all of your prepositional phrases are. It's then very important to make sure you know where your verbs are, and in this story that's easy to do because they're all highlighted in boldface. I forgot to highlight some of them in these opening sentences, so I'll do that right now. One of the things, or one of the reasons that it's important to look for verbs in a sentence is because in Latin, every time you have a verb, you have a unit of thought, and we call that unit of thought a clause. So that means that in this sentence, with this one verb, we have one unit of thought. All of these words work together in a grammatical unit. All of the words are grammatically related to one another. And that happens every time we have a single verb in a sentence. There are occasions, however, like in this sentence that starts with nunc, where we have more than one verb in a sentence. Nunc Jupiter iratissimus est, et filum Apollinem punire cupit. When you have more than one verb in a sentence, it is important to find the units of thought. Every verb has its own unit of thought. So we notice that in this sentence there is the verb est and the verb cupit and the verb punire. If you have a verb like punire, and you'll notice on your vocabulary list that this is called an infinitive, the infinitive is always going to work with the verb that is next to it. So these two words form a verb thought in a clause. But together, those verbs work with nouns and adjectives that form a separate unit of thought from the verb est. We have to learn how to separate the sentence into the separate units of thought. Romans didn't have punctuation. We do in our stories, and sometimes punctuation will help us to determine where the units of thought are within a sentence. But there are other clues that will be more readily available to us than punctuation. For example, a clause or a unit of thought often ends with a verb. Clauses are often joined together by conjunctions like and but, and for, and therefore, however, and so, and they separate units of thought. So here we see that our first verb is est, and we have a conjunction immediately after it. So that means that nunc Jupiter iratissimus est is one unit of thought. That means that all of those words function together and are connected and related to one another grammatically. But I cannot take anything from this set of words and move it into the next unit of thought, which starts after the conjunction with filium Apollinem punire cupit. Those words function independently of the other set, and we must translate filium Apollinem punire cupit as its own idea and connect that idea to the first idea with the conjunction that is provided for us. So this sentence, when we put it all together, the first unit of thought says, now Jupiter is very angry. And this set of words says that he wants to punish his son Apollo. And we join the two ideas together with and. So the whole thing would say, now Jupiter is very angry and wants to punish his son Apollo. Very important that we make sure we know where those clauses are in a Latin sentence if we hope to understand it properly. Take a look at this one. Phoebus Apollo ad Thessaliam regnum admeti volat, in regiam pulchram venit. So you'll notice I have two verbs, venit and volat. I notice that I also have a semicolon after volat, which should be a punctuation mark that we are all familiar with. We use that in English to separate two ideas, and it's going to do the same thing here in the Latin. So Phoebus Apollo ad Thessalium regnum admeti volat is one idea, and in regiam pulchram venit is another idea. When I look at this first idea, I notice that I have a prepositional phrase beginning with ad Thessaliam. Odd takes the accusative. I also noticed that regnum is also in the accusative. So I'm going to assume that regnum says something about Thessaliam, and that admeti is going to work with regnum because it's in the genitive, and you cannot have a genitive work with a verb, and a genitive has to go with the noun that comes immediately before it or the noun that comes immediately after it. There's no noun, so I'm going to put this in a prepositional phrase. Now, once I know that this is the prepositional phrase, I can see very clearly that my sentence is made up of these basic words: Phoebus, Apollo, Wolot. That's the main idea of the sentence. Phoebus, Apollo, flies. To where? To Thessaly, which is the kingdom of Admeuts. When I look at the next clause, I see that except for the verb, it's all a prepositional phrase. When I look on the vocabulary list, I notice that wainit can be translated as he comes, and then we translate the prepositional phrase into a beautiful palace. So by marking the clauses and the prepositional phrases within the clauses, what you do is you take something that's long and maybe is confusing about where to put all the words, and you make smaller chunks. And by making the smaller chunks, you make the sentence more manageable. And that's really the point behind finding your prepositional phrases and your clauses. Do not attempt to read Latin without thinking about where the clausal breaks are, especially if you have more than one verb in a sentence. If you start to move words wherever you want them into a sentence, play this kind of guessing game, you're going to get very confused and very mixed up about how to put things together. Latin is very systematic and very logical, but you have to think about it in a very logical way. And in some ways, it's kind of mathematical, right? In math, when you put things in parentheses and brackets, you have to deal with the information inside the parentheses and the brackets first. And Latin is like that. You just have to figure out where the brackets are. So good luck with that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me and we can get together. I've been working with some people via Google Docs in some tutoring sessions. So if you'd like to work a little bit together on some of this, if it's confusing to you, we can sit down and work together with this. So by all means, work through the translation of the story. You will receive points for that. For a formative grade. I will have a rubric posted in the file where the story and the vocabulary list are located, so you can see how you are graded on that. You will also, as I mentioned at the beginning, receive a formative grade for answering the checking for understanding questions. You will also be receiving a grade for participating in the discussion, the VoiceThread discussion in Moodle, in the Moodle module, on the essential questions that are attached to this story. The due dates for all of this are located at the very front of the Moodle course. When you open it up, you'll see that under the weekly assignments and due dates. Good luck and have fun!